It's a check on the power of the governor, the legislature, and it allows our Constitution to be a living document that can change as the world changes.
One of the issues New Yorkers will decide tomorrow is whether or not our state will hold a constitutional convention in 2019. News 4's Jen Shantz spoke with two experts who point out what a convention would do and why it's been so long since we've held one. Jen?
Now, Lena, it's been 50 years since New Yorkers wanted to hold a convention, which allows elected delegates to propose changes to the state's current constitution. Whether or not a convention would benefit you as a voter depends on a few things, like what issues you care most about and who you think will be elected in your Senate district as a convention delegate.
What this all really comes down to is who do you think is going to go to the convention? Each Senate district gets 3 people elected from their Senate district. Well, who's likely to get elected?
Every 20 years, New Yorkers get a chance to change the law of the land. The last time we had a constitutional convention was in 1967. We passed on a convention 30 years later, and Tuesday, voters will decide once again. The provision to have a vote like this at all was created back in 1846 as an alternative path to reform.
You get 3 bites of the apple. We decide whether we want to have a convention. We decide who the delegates are, and we decide whether their work is worthy of putting into our Constitution.
In 1967, the changes made at the convention were not adopted because voters didn't agree with them in the end. Peter Galli, who's written extensively about the convention, says that was in part because voters were handed an all-or-nothing package.
I don't believe any convention delegate who cares about having their rights accepted will ever say, let's give it to them all in a package and see if they take it. That's suicide.
If we have another convention, Galli thinks voters would decide on more controversial changes separately. He's in favor of a convention because he thinks it could cut down on corruption in Albany. Some of the most anticipated issues driving the push for or against a convention are term limits, gun rights, and pensions. This sign in Niagara Falls warns voters that a convention could repeal protections for state pensions.
New York State, particularly for public employees, pensions are not in the contract. They're actually a legislative action. It hasn't allowed New York State to underfund their pensions, so that we haven't seen the crises we've seen, for example, in California or in Wisconsin or in Illinois.
Floss says pensions aren't at risk of being taken away completely, but they could be cut if certain changes were made to the state's constitution. Now, again, those who drive the convention are the delegates, which have to be elected. Each Senate district gets 3 seats with 15 at-large positions. So how much would a convention cost? Well, not everyone agrees here. Fred Floss, the chair of the Department of Economics and Finance at Buff State, who you just heard from, he estimates it would be around $150 million. That's taxpayer money. Galli, though, estimates it would cost between $50 and $75 million, based on how much it was in 1967 relative to today. Live in the newsroom, Jen Shantz, News 4.
Really good.